Welcome, everyone. Happy Friday. Happy Friday. It's good to see you. Dr. Nika White. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I am elated to spend this hour with each of you. We're just giving it a couple moments for everyone to get settled into our virtual Zoom community, or even if those who are joining by LinkedIn to get settled in that space as well. We're so glad you're here. We've been anticipating this time as we do every Friday. We have a wonderful lineup today of information, and I cannot wait for you to meet our guest co-host today, Dr. Shaunna Payne Gold, which will happen momentarily. But while we are just getting started, if you would go to the chat, let us know where you're joining the conversation from. We are always pleased to see that we touch all different types of states and even some global geographies, and that's very exciting to us. And so thank you for committing this time with each of us as we learn with and from each other. And you have reached Intentional Conversations VodCast. This is a podcast where we intersect conversations of diversity, equity, and inclusion with leadership and business. If you also feel inclined to remain connected to this community, I invite you to also share your LinkedIn information into the chat. That lets us know that you don't mind us reaching out and having another way to be in community with you. Cameras today, if you're joined in our Zoom community, they are encouraged and welcomed, but certainly not required. We know that many of you join in just an auditory capacity to observe. Either way, we're glad you're here. But if you do feel compelled to turn those cameras on, we certainly will meet you and greet you with a great smile back. I also want you to know that we do have closed caption that is available today. That is part of our way at NWC showing up for disability inclusion. So if that's of use for you, then I want you to know that that is available to you. Today, I encourage each of you to use the chat as we engage and learn with and from each other. If I say something that resonates with you, or our guest co-host mentions something that you align with, then I want you to go to the chat, share those sentiments, pull out those emojis, those reactions. That is a way for us to get proximate to each other and to really extend the sense of community as we're here together. We've been doing this podcast now for 3.5 years, and I often like to share that we also have intentional conversations available in a podcast capacity. So if after today, you feel inclined to share this opportunity with others that you know who like to get their content in a podcast capacity, let them know, no worry, they can do so. You can also catch the replay if you like. It will be shared on our YouTube channel. Once again, I'm Dr. Nika White, and you have joined Intentional Conversations VodCast, where we intersect conversations of DEI with leadership and business. Welcome. Awesome. So yes, as the screen said, let the conversations begin. It is such an honor to be the host of Intentional Conversations VodCast, but I do not do this alone. We are able to, at NWC, bring you this experience because we care deeply about giving you an opportunity to extend your learning around the broad topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I do want to shout out the NWC team. We divide and conquer around this experience, and I'm always so grateful to them. Special shout out to my colleague Cosette Strong, who in my absence last week hosted our guest co-host, who was Netta Jenkins. And so I was able to catch that replay, and it was fantastic. So for those of you who joined, I'm sure you also enjoyed it as well. One of the things we like to do at NWC is to amplify some of the observances that are happening as we continue to show forth a level of support for those who are part of marginalized communities. And so let's amplify disability pride, right? June was Pride Month, and so Disability Pride Month is actually in July, and I want to make sure we take a moment just to acknowledge that. So it's important for us to recognize that the month of June is Minority Mental Health Awareness Month. We are seeing a high rise, particularly of Black men who are experiencing depression and other mental health issues. And so let's make sure we continue to apply the pressure to get our men to get tested and assessed and get the support and the help that they need. So let's make sure that we are keeping that top of mind and communicating on it as often as possible. For those of you who have been a part of our community, you know that I released book number 3 earlier this year in partnership with Forbes Books, and it is Inclusion Uncomplicated, a transformative guide to simplify DEI, available anywhere where you like to purchase your books. And it's also available on Kindle and audiobook as well as the hard copy. So I hope that you will take advantage of getting that, making it a part of your library. And if you already have it, I welcome Amazon reviews or a review on Goodreads. Thank you so much in advance for your support. And speaking of Inclusion Uncomplicated, we do have some specially curated learning experiences that are inspired by Inclusion Uncomplicated, and they're known as Unravel the Knot. We would love to be in communication with any of you who would like to bring such an opportunity to your organization. My team will place into the chat the URL where you can find more information on our website, and we hope that you will certainly consider that. I'm excited to share that my LinkedIn Learning course is now live. It's all about the personal accountability for equity and inclusion. And so I hope that you will take advantage of that course. I hope that you will share it out. I am super excited to be a part of the LinkedIn Learning community as an instructor and already working on content for course 2 and 3 to be released after the first of the year. But certainly I want you to be aware of this. This is a big milestone for me. I've always set and coveted the opportunity. So to be able to be a part of the instructor team is really something that I value and I'm humbled by. So thank you so much for your support. Now, one of the things that we love to do is give you a head nod to what you have to look forward to in future weeks in terms of Intentional Conversations VodCast. And so I want you to know that next week on the 14th, we will be welcoming Jessica Farm. And in that conversation, we're going to discuss Black professionals in the workplace, how to navigate minefields and advocate for yourself and those manager relationships. And so I hope you will join me on July 14th. And then following that week, the next Friday on the 21st, I'm going to welcome Aisha Joseph. And in that Intentional Conversations, we're going to be discussing decentering whiteness in the workplace, structural versus programmatic DEI efforts, and how anti-Blackness shows up in non-Black marginalized groups in the workforce. And so if you don't know these individuals that I'm mentioning, look them up, get to know them. They are incredible. And I have no doubt that those are going to be riveting conversations. So to round us out at the end of the month, we have Lillian Forsyth that's going to be joining us. And in that conversation, we're going to discuss why DEI efforts at organizations should focus much less on hiring and much more on performance management, making inclusive behaviors part of every leader's performance review. That's that accountability piece, and how to integrate DEI principles into all soft skills training. And so I look forward to that conversation rounding us out for the month of July, and I hope that you will join us. We are now booking for Q4 for Intentional Conversations co-hosts, and we would love to get your recommendations. So if you know of someone, or maybe that someone is you, and you want to share that information for our consideration, I invite you to submit that to my colleague, Amora Carter, and that's simply at amora@nikawhite.com. Many of our guests that have appeared have come by way of recommendations from you all, and we're always grateful for that. So now, if you've joined our community, you know that I always like to take an opportunity to formally introduce our guest co-host. It's so important for me for people to understand their accolades, their credentials, their experience, and the lens in which they show up to our conversation. So today will be no different. I am delighted and honored to present Dr. Shaunna Payne Gold. Dr. Shaunna Payne Gold has over 26 years of experience in diversity, equity, and inclusion topics. She holds degrees from James Madison University, Eastern Mennonite University, and George Washington University. She recently retired from her senior leadership role as Assistant Provost for Diversity and Inclusion to expand her consultancy, Gold Enterprises, LLC, which provides DEI assessment, strategy, facilitation, education, and change management planning for organizations that strive to be fully inclusive. So you know what to do at this time, podcast community. Find those emojis, find those reactions, find whatever sentiments that are coming up for you. And I want you to share them into the chat to help our guest co-host today feel the warmth of welcome and appreciation for being here with us. Dr. Shaunna, it is such an honor. Thank you so much. I am thrilled to have you here. Thank you for saying yes to our invitation. We don't take that lightly. And I want to give you a chance to greet this audience in your own way. And something that we often will ask our guest co-hosts to consider as they're sharing is what's something maybe we would not know about you from reading your bio, or even maybe from reading the content in your LinkedIn profile. help us to get to know you better. Welcome, Dr. Shaunna.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nika. I'm so appreciative to be here in your space. I have been a fan for a long time as I've been watching on social media and connecting with other folks that really had the same sentiments in mind, but also challenged my thinking as well. So I just felt always that we were these mutual social media friends that we didn't even
Yes.
know of, right? Exactly. So I'm so appreciative of this invitation. But again, my name is Dr. Shaunna Payne. I go by she, her, hers pronouns. Really happy to be with you all today. I really understand how this has been a pretty tense couple of weeks. I would suggest a tense few years, but I really appreciate the opportunity to just kind of think out loud with thought partners around these particular topics. I come to this space with 26 years of experience in diversity, equity, and inclusion work in such a way that it sometimes frazzles me when I hear people talk about these topics as if they are new. Many of them are not new, but they're in different iterations. And so I just want to acknowledge and appreciate those that have been in the trenches even before myself and Dr. Nika. I would suggest before either one of us were in the trenches. There were folks doing this work and we're carrying the torch on. So I'm really appreciative to be in this space. I come to you as a true educator, and I come from that space with deep humility because there are a few things to think about there. Dr. Nika, you hit the nail on the head in regards to things that folks wouldn't see or know from a website or a resume, a CV. I found out a couple of years ago when I was visiting my grandmother, who's now 97. She'll be 98 in August. And I was visiting her, and grandmothers often keep those thoughtful
Thank you.
tokens and photos and so forth. And I found a photo of who I knew was my great grandfather, her father. And so I noticed him, and he was in this group of people, and they were his siblings. Those were 6 of 11 siblings at that time. And out of the 4 women in the picture, all 4 of them were educators. All 4 of them were teachers, whether they taught literally in one-room schoolhouses or taught in what were called normal schools at the time. Of course, many of them taught in their houses of worship and churches and communities and so forth. But I did not know that until a couple of years ago when I saw that photo and started to ask some questions. And it all started to make sense to me. How I found myself in academia, moving beyond academia to continue to educate and teach. And I'm really proud of that, partially because I never knew why I felt called to this work. But once I saw this probably is in my DNA somewhere, it all made
Yeah.
sense to me. So that history is very real for me now. Even when I go places to talk or speak or even just facilitate a conversation, the first assumption is that I've been an educator at some point in my life, and that's not because of just what I have done, but that lineage, of course. So absolutely, Dr. Michelle is in the blood. We just can't help ourselves, right? And so I'm appreciative to come to this space with that lineage in mind.
That is great. I'm so excited that you were able to learn that information about your ancestry. I think that's critically important. It helps us to connect some dots that sometimes we're wondering, like, oh, I wonder why is this so embedded in me? And then it's like, aha, that's why it's in my blood. So I love that for you. It's actually inspiring me to go deeper into my ancestry. I've never taken one of those assessments. My husband has, and he's so thrilled about the results. And so you're inspiring me to probably go a little bit deeper in that. Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about your education background because you have retired from that space and now you're doing your consultancy work 100%. The reason that I want to talk about this is because first and foremost, right now, we are still grieving and processing the news of affirmative action reversal, right? And coming from a higher learning institution, I'm sure that news really, created lots of emotions for you, right? And so I want to hear how you've been processing, but then I also want to understand how you foresee the transition from working in academia to now doing this work maybe for organizations or nonprofits, how that shift is also maybe shaping your lens and how you're showing up to this work.
Yeah, so let me just share. The pandemic was, I say this gently, it was a good eye-opening process for me. And
Mm,
that was because I had a 50 plus commute in one direction to my higher ed
wow.
position. I'm not one of those folks that would get online and write about how my job sucked, my employer sucked, my supervisor sucked. I had the ideal situation. And in fact, they were doing a pay equity study right before I left, and I got a bump up in pay and still walked out the door. And it wasn't because of anything negative that was going on, but I realized that a lot of this work that we needed to do in the DEI space needed to be cross industries, because I found that we were educating these wonderful students in higher ed spaces only to go out into employee spaces
Yeah.
that did not understand the verbiage, did not understand their perspectives. What do you mean pronouns? Why do I need to use them? Whereas I have a rising 7th grader and a rising 4th grader that use pronouns all the time. And so I felt like we were doing a disservice in, yes, we're supporting students to be great, but at the same time, we're sending them to places that don't understand them, and they have not been educated around what they need to know, which then creates this intergenerational workplace fisticuffs that doesn't need to be one. And so given that, that's when I thought to myself, okay, this is going to be interesting retiring, because yes, I love what I do and I have no complaints. And I know the assumption is you're leaving because of a grievance of some sort. When in fact, going back to your point at the top of our time together, it was better for my mental health not to take that commute. I was feeling anxiety on the side of the road, just driving to work each day. And I said, I've got to take care of myself there. I have to buy myself more time to get more exercise in and all those other things that feed into our mental, physical, emotional health. Wanted to be there for my boys because it is a true, unique, and sometimes folks do not covet having to raise Black men in this country. And so I have 2 young boys, and they are the most important legacy that anyone could ever leave. So I needed to pour into that. Side note, Dr. Nika, my sons love sports. And so as I watch professional athletes that are grown adults that still cry because parents, family, friends, et cetera, weren't there to support them when they were young boys, that disturbed me. And so that kind of fed into some of that piece. And so now I see myself still working for the benefit of higher education, but knowing I'm working on the other end of, I'm preparing places for our college graduates to go to that are more similar to what we've educated them about, around, for, to do. And so I think that's really important. And for me, I actually retired myself and didn't look back, because frankly, industries were thirsty for this work. They were ready for this work. And so as the SCOTUS hearings happened and so forth, I was grieving still, I would say grieving big time, because we're at this conundrum of both, we're dealing with race and not dealing with anti-racism work that we need to do. We're dealing with admissions processes, which, yes, on the face of it, some people would say, oh, we should not need race-based admissions because everyone should be seen in this particular way. That should be true, but does that really account for history that we're trying to make up for?
Yes,
I have a really good colleague of mine who I work with a lot, and she identifies as a white woman. We both work arm in arm constantly on work. And she says, Shaunna, it's like, you and I are running a marathon and I get like, a 2-hour head start, but you're still expected to cross the finish line the same time I do. And I said, yeah, that's true. And on top of that, there are times where I can't even get on the course to run because of the rules, the policies, procedures that are just not considering our students. And so I'm still in grief, y'all. But I'll be clear, I'm still in grief around a lot of the hearings.
I am right there with you. I'm still grieving. And honestly, one of my recent posts talked about the fact that being a practitioner in this space, I felt the pressure, and I felt compelled to react and respond in a public way. And I finally had to say, look, just because we're practitioners, we're not immune to grieving these types of news, this type of news. And quite honestly, when your space, your life work is being attacked That is heavy. That is a lot. And so I gave myself permission to kind of step away and not feel the need to kind of rush to respond in a certain way. People were kind of tagging me and saying, what are your thoughts? And I'm like, give me my space right now, because this is really impactful, And so I share that broadly because I do believe, I'm not sure, Dr. Shaun, if you have experienced this, but I do believe that sometimes even as practitioners, we are seen as, inhuman and able to just immediately kind of process this news. This is our livelihood. This is a lot of what we are working tirelessly for day in and day out. And so I'm with you. I'm still grieving as well. I do appreciate that what has come to surface in light of the affirmative action reversal is the question of legacy. Why was that not also a part of the original
Yes.
conversation? So I'm glad that that's now being brought to the fore. I'm hoping that that will also continue to apply pressure to the naysayers of affirmative action so they can really understand the totality of the impact of that decision.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so, yeah, I am right there with you. I also love that your philosophy, as you were talking about your story from transitioning from higher learning to now doing this work, I love that your philosophy is that we aren't just preparing students to understand the craft, the trade, the knowledge to be able to do the work, but we need for them to also be able to navigate the workplace. And so if we don't bring some of that content that I know that you are really steeped in right now in your
Yes.
consultancy to the higher learning environment, we are really causing our young people to miss opportunities to be able to thrive. And I appreciate that philosophy, and I'm hoping that others are listening and that they are finding ways to try to embed that same level of thinking into higher learning institutions. Yeah. We need them to be
No,
prepared, right?
right. Well, and you reminded me of last year, I did a workshop for a law firm actually that wanted to learn more about intergenerational workplaces, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I had a woman that was in that space with us. There were about 50 people in the room. And there was a woman that was clearly very frustrated, extremely frustrated by quote unquote young people who don't want to work, right? Now, when I talked further with her, she was from my same generation. We're both Generation Xers, if you will. And she talked about this young people not wanting to work. And then we talked about the differences in generations and how our young people, especially those that are college age, I dare to say traditional college age, they go through higher education, and we've taught them about connecting their professional skill sets with their values. But then they show up to your law firm or whatever workplace, and those values don't match. And so
Right.
they're making a conscious decision not to work for or with you based on how they were raised and educated. And so when I
Mhm.
talked a little bit further with her on the side of that conversation, she then started making the connections between her nieces and nephews and so forth, which she has said to them, look, yeah, of course you need to make a living and be a functioning adult. And at the same time, if there are things that challenge your values, you need to consider that deeply. This is not just
Yeah.
putting cogs in wheels, but you need to consider that. And that exactly is the point. We
That is
can't
spot
say,
on.
expect this type of workplace, and then we don't work to create it for them, because
Oh,
then we're just
absolutely.
creating a mirage that's not there. And that's not fair to students. It's not fair to them.
Yeah. And it turns into rhetoric instead of being something that people are really committed to. And so
That's
we
it.
know rhetoric gets us nowhere. It gets us
That's it.
nowhere. So no, I love that. Really, really sage advice. I also was impressed upon the fact that, you acknowledged that your workplace, it was great. There was nothing about it, because we don't hear those stories as often these days. I think people are more forthcoming about the
Yeah.
toxicity of maybe some of the organizations they find themselves in. But for you to say
Mhm.
it was the great environment, it was more about the commute. And I think that also deserves a little bit of airtime because, there are a lot of people who are against the remote work. There are a lot of people who are fighting it. And what we're finding is that it really is causing people to make decisions about whether or not they want to be with certain organizations as an employee. So I think that's
Mhm.
really critical. So
Mhm.
Dr. Shaunna, and by the way, Dr. Shaunna is my soror. We're both members of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. So I'm going to probably fluctuate between Dr. Shaunna and Shaunna. But what I want
Yeah.
to now talk about is that we hear language like there's a war on DEI. DEI is being attacked. And I think that we are feeling it. But something that I have become a bit more cognizant about is the vernacular, right? Language is so important. And so
Yes.
while I feel it, I am starting to minimize using language like that, because it then can become a self-fulfilling prophecy in some ways, right? But when you
Yes.
hear that type of language, what comes up for you? And do you think that what we're feeling and experiencing right now is here to stay? Or is it just kind of this phase right now that's going to work its way through?
Oh, let me tell you, I appreciate your point on that because I was looking, this was a couple of days ago, I was looking at a meme that was talking about the differences between violent language and nonviolent language. And I
Yeah.
said, oh, how interesting is it that we're using violent language to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion against oppressed groups that have experienced violence, start to
Yes.
finish, to modern day. And so I've done my best to start pruning my language of violence in that way. So that's one thing that I'm constantly working on. But here's the other thing too. I was thinking about DEI from the analogy of a roller coaster, right? And that roller coaster it could be a roller coaster, it could be a stock market that goes up and down, that type of thing. We have, for those of us that have been doing this for a good long time, there have been times where we were the undercurrent working under the scenes that really nobody acknowledged or at least thought about, right? So that was kind of the taking off point of the roller coaster where you're kind of going flat. Then we rose a bit because, oh, let's all panic because we all were sitting still long enough to notice that a Black man is murdered, along with our
Yeah.
Asian siblings, along with
Yeah.
all of that globally. And so we were sitting still long enough to see what was going on. And therefore, there felt to be an imperative of we need to do something. And so folks did something. They hired chief
Mhm.
diversity officers, they hired directors of diversity, they hired what have you. They put together a cursory DEI committee, et cetera, et cetera. And now, exactly what I predicted when this happened, we are now, almost 4 years down the road, and we are now seeing the difference between the wheat and the chaff in regards to who really was sold out on diversity and who was doing a performance. We are
Yeah.
seeing it right now.
We
And when
are.
you are doing the real DEI work, it kind of reminds me of when people work out and they say, you're not working out yet until it hurts. Well, baby, it's hurting now. And let's see
Yes.
if you're really working out. Let's see if you're really sold out when, when I consult, for example, I'm coaching with a university president or their cabinet, et cetera. And the first thoughts they have around certain things are, well, this is a lawsuit waiting to happen. This is, et cetera. And I challenge them to say, which lawsuits are worth it? I'm not afraid of a
That
lawsuit. I'm
part.
not afraid of attorneys. What I am concerned with is lack of change. And sometimes legally, there have to be some implications and there have to be a backbone to leaders. And so I wouldn't necessarily be afraid of the legalities. I would be afraid if I looked at your organization and I really could not see what you stand for and what's a line in the sand as far as diversity, equity, and inclusion work. If
Oh,
I
I
can't see
applaud
that
that, Dr.
clearly,
Shaunna.
we got work to do. We got work to do.
That is it. That is so rich. Absolutely. And I think that there are a number of leaders who want to try to navigate this space without
Yeah.
any type of risk or threat. And that is just not plausible, right? Because it assumes that everyone is going to think the same way, behave the same way. That's just not human nature. And so
That's
counting the
right.
cost, but being firm in one's belief and value set, no matter what kind of adversity comes their way, is so critical. So I
Yes.
love that you're
Yeah.
amplifying that message to those that are falling under your guidance and your counsel. So let's
Yeah.
talk about the Crown Act. July 3rd, we did recognize the Crown Act, and there's still a bit of work to go. I know that there's petitions that are going around right now, and people are being asked to sign it. There are about maybe 21 states, I believe, that have already adopted some type of legislation around hair discrimination, race-based hair discrimination, but there's still a number of other states. And so I know that at the federal level, we're trying to get this passed. So what conversations are you hearing or being a part of relevant to hair discrimination? And how has that maybe
Yes.
personally kind of impacted you and your professional journey?
Oh, that's a great question. So my ideal job that I retired from, that we were just talking about before, this reminds me of the day I walked in for my interview. And I remember walking into this beautiful suite, getting ready for my interview, and there was someone sitting at the front reception desk, and I couldn't tell who it was, but I saw the back of the monitor computer screen, and I saw this gorgeous afro that came out from behind that monitor. And I said to myself right then and there, here. And so it ended up being this beautiful graduate student that she's wonderful. But that was my first thought around even hair in and of itself, because I do remember those days when I worked at a much more conservative, predominantly white institution. I've done nothing but work at predominantly white institutions until I retired myself. And I remember those days of asking my executive assistant to look at my calendar for the next few days so I could determine what hairstyle I wanted to wear for those days. So if I'm going into the president's office or the cabinet or talking to the provost, oh, that's a day when I had longer hair, bone straight, right? Whereas other days where I was primarily working with students, go for it, honey. And so, with that, just the mere fact that I was taking the emotional labor to think about that is problematic. So fast forward now, I worked at a higher ed institution that had no problem with any hairstyle, et cetera. The one I have now, I probably would have never worn 25, 26 years ago when I first started doing this work in particular. And I often think about the ridiculousness of connecting hair, natural hairstyles to the skill sets and abilities of human beings. I don't
Absolutely.
understand it. And so just this week, I was working with an organization. Let's take Crown Act and connect it to other things here. I was just having a conversation with one of the hardest tasks that an organization can do when it comes to inclusivity, which connects to this, writing an inclusive dress code, which oftentimes includes hair, attire, tattoos, all kinds of things going on, right? And so we had a really great dialogue about what does this mean? And usually it was about perception and not reality. So I'm sitting in a room of 25 people that say, I have no problem if you work with K through 12 kids and you have sleeve tattoos down every part of your body because you're a great teacher. You're exceptional at what you do. But what will other people think? And I think that perception piece is the part that we need to disrupt, because it's, again, as much as it always pains me to say this, we usually do DEI work, unfortunately, within the confines of white comfort. What is comfortable for white individuals?
Of course.
And once you start pushing outside of that box of white comfort, then all of a sudden it's problematic. I'm not going to contort myself. And my organizations call me in to show them where they're contorting themselves so they don't have to in the future. And we've contorted ourselves, especially as Black women, we have contorted ourselves for years in regards to hair. And so we have to now push back and say, we're not going to do it anymore. And not only are we not going to do it, but we're also going to literally demolish the systems that have allowed you to do this. We're not doing this anymore. And so I appreciate how it fits into a larger system. And I also appreciate how I don't have to think about that anymore. And that's a privilege, that's a privilege I had to grasp for myself that I know not everyone still feels that way. So.
It so resonated with me when you talked about having to look at your calendar and your schedule to identify, okay, I have vacation coming up, so I'm going to have vacation hair. It may be some type of braids or whatever, but then right on the heels of that, I do have a meeting. So how do I get my hairdresser to make sure it was maddening. Exactly. It was maddening. So I too am so glad that is behind me, and I want that for everyone. And so I'm hoping that this legislation will pick up speed across other states that are sitting back right now, or fence sitters and trying to decide, do we want to tackle this or not? Because to your point, Dr. Shaunna, it absolutely has nothing to do with the qualifications of a person, and so it's irrelevant, and it should not be brought to the consideration set. Now,
and I think to your point, Dr. Nika, I just want to interject too here that, I think oftentimes, again, going back to that comfort piece, is that also we forget that for many of us, our hair tells an entire history of a people. So when you're uncomfortable with cornrows, and we know that cornrows historically gave us the maps to Underground Railroads, I don't care how uncomfortable you are. Right. Because this is not, I don't like it. This is my history. And I'm not willing to compromise on that. Now, I didn't know that when I first started in the DEI world. And obviously, we're human beings, right? So we're growing as we're learning and teaching. And so now that I know that, if my sons go somewhere and they're applying for a job and someone does not care for whatever hairstyle that they wear at the time, I've raised children that know that this is part of your heritage and you don't have to tolerate it.
Absolutely. Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you for bringing that history into this conversation. You said something earlier too, as we were talking about this. You mentioned that there are some individuals who may, frame this as, "I'm fine with it. It looks fine to me, but I'm worried about the perception of others." And I think that that
Right,
is just a lousy cop out, to be honest with you, because I mean, if
right,
you're
right.
fine with it and you're a part of the leadership of this organization, why not set the tone? Why not model that? Why be so concerned about the perceptions of others instead
Mhm,
of seeing that as a
mhm.
moment of education and a moment of allyship and advocacy of the fact that it has nothing to do with the competency of an individual? And so when people say
Right.
stuff like that, I pay attention to it because there's a subliminal message there that I think needs to be
Yes,
interrogated and unpacked.
yes,
So yeah,
yes.
so I want to talk about just pulling from all of your experience in the DEI sector. Can you provide us with some of the lesser known skills and competencies and qualifications that, from your vantage point, DEI professionals need to have to be successful? And specifically, I'm asking this question, Dr. Shaunna, in recognition that this body of work is getting harder and harder because of all of the naysayers. So we have to bring our A game. And so maybe what our A game was years ago is not necessarily the same now. So, what are those lesser known skills that people need to really lean into and build
Mhm,
up in order to be really
mhm,
effective in this space?
mhm. Oh, that's such a great question because my my colleagues that I work with very closely know that I have this soapbox that I've been on it for years, around how do we move folks from DEI programmers to DEI strategists. That is my
Mhm.
hobby horse for years. And the reason why I say that is because I remember, at my previous institution, we were interviewing for a position that was a DEI position at the time. And we had a very deep and wide pool. And even in the best of that pool, those folks went directly into programming. I did this programming for Native American history. I did this programming for Kwanzaa. I did this programming for MLK, all of which we need. So nobody run down the street saying that Shaunna doesn't want that. I want all of that plus more.
Yes, yes,
And at the same time, I want folks that understand how that programming links to larger strategies, policies, and systems that
yes,
function around us, right?
yes,
So no, I don't want your Kwanzaa if we're still arguing about how Shaunna can wear her hair to work tomorrow. I don't want that because all that's connected in a larger system, right? And so given that, going to your point around what skills are needed, one big thing I think is desperately needed is, of course, systems thinking. We usually
yeah,
use this when it's connected to inventions or innovations. And I will say, especially for Black people, we are extremely strong when it comes to innovation and inventions already. We have a
we
long
are.
history of that.
Absolutely,
So
we are.
yeah, so why not apply that to our DEI work in particular? My boys thought it was so cool that a Black man created the super soaker because it's summer, so that was cool for them. But connecting it to systems and innovation, that's one piece. Another piece that I think is really important, which any of my colleagues from the past know, that having strong dialogue facilitation skills is important, especially in the United States.
Good.
The reason being, folks don't want to engage in a conversation unless they can win the debate. And usually it's not about winning anything. It's about deeper understanding of individuals and understanding their stories so that
Mm,
if there's not a point that needs to be agreed upon, we can at least have further understanding of how people got to where they are in the moment and how they make decisions. So dialogue is extremely important as a facilitator, someone who can lead and guide people through that process. And then the last piece, which I added to my arsenal during the pandemic, I think every DEI practitioner should run out the door right now and get some type of training or certification in change management. Change management. Now, let me tell you my flaw and where this happened and then how I turned that corner. Had been doing DEI work for many, many years and beyond programming, had been doing policy work, procedure work, et cetera, building out boards, so forth, nonprofit spaces, all that. And then what happened, really interesting, is that a lot of clients got the DEI audit from my team, or they got the to-do list, if you will, as far as what we found were problems, Achilles heels in their organization. And then they're like, oh my goodness, I'm so overwhelmed. I don't even know where to start. And because of overwhelm, even for underrepresented leaders, they were still like, I need to let this report cool off for a minute because I don't even know where to begin, right? So that's when we get into the change management piece. And that's where we literally take an organization through a very strategic process of prioritizing what needs to be done and then helping the entire organization understand what's happening as the change is occurring. So I know everybody on this call has probably been in an environment where somebody sent out an email with, we're changing the policy to XYZ, or we're moving here, or whatever it is. No explanation, no conversation, no nothing. It was just informing you of that. That is the
Mhm.
exact opposite of change management.
Right.
Change management is involving people in the process along the way. And I think what's really important about the acceptance of change is that based on the science of change management, even when folks disagree with the decision and the outcome, they still feel committed to it if they were part of the process and they were informed of the process.
Yes, 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 yes. You just said a mouthful. All of that is so rich. And I hope that this community has certainly captured all that you shared. I want to
Mhm.
recap some of this. Okay, so again, we're talking about skills that DEI professionals need to take us into this new evolved way of doing work so that
Yes.
it sticks, right? That endurance factor. Systems thinking, innovation, absolutely. And I love what you said about how sometimes we will define this work as a program, which is an activity with a start and an end date. We rather need to think about it from a strategy where we're thinking about systems, policies, procedure. I love that. We're definitely aligned on that. That's where the impact comes in. Secondly, dialogue facilitation. Those persuasion skills, which includes our ability to actively listen, our ability to have a questioning frame of
Yes.
mind, all of that. I call that bridging the gap. That's what it is. We're bridging the gap through
Yes.
those dialogues. And so I love that. And then thirdly, you said change management. We have to involve people. People don't mind change if you help them to understand what is the reason for the change. That's where the clarity piece comes in. We have to over
Yes.
communicate around these big decisions where change is
Yes.
occurring. And so I love that. So I just wanted to make sure that this audience was capturing those three important skill sets that you brought to the conversation. Really rich. So I wanted to give our audience a heads up that momentarily I'm going to be shifting and I'm going to allow you an opportunity to ask your questions or to contribute whatever type of commentary that you would like to add to today's discussion. And if you're joining us in this Zoom community, you can do so by using the raise hand feature. That will let me know that you're willing to be unmuted and to be spotlighted so that I can allow you to share directly. Or if you're just here again, serving in an auditory capacity and you want to share your question in the chat, we are paying attention to it and we will certainly bring those questions to the conversation. If you're joining us LinkedIn Live and you want to place your comments, questions into the comment section there, we have teammates here that are paying attention to what's happening in the community there, and they will bring it into the Zoom room here. And so I'm going to go to my next question while you all percolate on perhaps what you want to ask of Dr. Shaunna or what you want to contribute. I want to talk about Equity Summer School. This is an initiative that you have underway, and I want this community to know about it. So unpack that for us, Dr. Shaunna.
Yes, no, I'm glad you asked that question because let me tell you, I think one of our sorors is on the call right now, Dr. Nika, who said, can't make Equity Summer School, but can you do something else in the fall? But Equity Summer School, I realized, especially for my higher ed folks, but it really applies to any industry, that they are swamped during the fall and the spring, but summer loosens up a little bit. Yeah, you travel. Yeah, you have some time with your kids, et cetera. You have time with family members, loved ones, but it gives you a little bit of breathing room. And so what we decided to do was to package 6 weeks of 90-minute sessions to encapsulate exactly what you just asked me before, Dr. Nika, around what are those essential skills that you need in order to become that DEI strategist. And so those 6 weeks cover a lot in a very short time period with lots of resources in between. And so given that, we go over, these are the basics of DEI, but here's the systems theory that goes along with it. These are the fundamentals of being a dialogue facilitator. A lot of folks, they participated in a dialogue, but actually when you're called upon to facilitate one, do you know what you're doing, right? Also knowing too, around that change management piece, I went through an organization called ProSci, which was wonderful to get my my certification, but that was 40 hours for a full week, pre-work, post-work, all the work. And I said, this is a lot. And it's a lot for people who are either not doing DEI full-time. And even if you are doing DEI full-time, it's hard to carve out a full week. And so we encapsulated that as well into 6 90-minute sessions. And so we are literally going live at this afternoon to make sure that folks have fall equity school on September 15th. So in that way, folks still get to carve everything together into one large session, and then you get a 30-minute executive coaching session with me at the end of that time. And so we're super excited that the response was great and that people said, yeah, this is stuff that you're not going to find. I have 3 degrees and I'm working on a 4th, and none of them teach any of this stuff. And that's the reason why I put it together.
I love that. Thank you for your leadership. I have been in many conversations with other practitioners that have shared sentiments of we need some deeper training and learning to prepare people who want to be into this space. And while I was grateful that so many individuals, particularly after the murder of George Floyd, they had this huge interest in becoming DEI experts. But I also was worried about the fact that you just can't become an expert overnight, and so I love when I'm hearing about people that are really strong in this space, offering their insights, their knowledge to help train up others. And so how can people sign up and become aware? Can you, for the September, because I understand that now the summer is underway, it is full. Okay, that train, but there's another one coming.
Absolutely. Another one is coming. That's right. We're going live this afternoon. So I'm in Eastern time and it's almost noon. So by the time the majority of us log off of this call, the form and the links will be all ready to go. And so I'm super excited that I'm able to offer this opportunity to folks. It's on a Friday. We're hoping that you can take that time to be with us. But exactly, my concern was you could not find this anywhere. And I'm thinking to myself, well, look, I'm really never going to be able to retire if there aren't people to replace me. So how can I replace myself in a way that I know that I feel comfortable passing the torch on to others? Because Dr. Nika, you and I, one day we want to sit down. We want to sit down. We want to sit down, right? And so I'm trying to make it happen a little quicker, right? But I do want to move people from that programming space to that strategy space, because what I don't want to see in another 20, 30, 40 years that we're working on things that I was working on my first few years.
Yeah, no, I so appreciate that. This is not just about execution. It really is about aligning strategic principles with work so that it can create the change that we need. I love the fact that Sheila from our community, she shared in the chat that bandwidth is also an issue in the nonprofit space as well. And so knowing that a lot of nonprofit professionals are dealing with, human services, human needs, I think that those individuals also should be in the consideration set of aligning with your equity school program. And so thank you for that thought, Sheila. So I'm not seeing any hands raised right now. Maybe people are still thinking, but I still have more questions. So I'm going to continue along. And this is a question that stems from our earlier talk where you were sharing some of those skill sets that practitioners in this space certainly need to have. So related, but slightly different, are there any new practices or priorities that from your vantage point should be implemented widely in the DEI field?
Yeah, well, a number of them that I want folks to think about is I'm very, how can I say, I'm a pot stirrer when it comes to DEI work and human resources as an industry. Every position that I've been in, I've worked parallel to HR, or I've worked collaboratively with HR. And every single time I've worked with human resources, it has certainly been from a compliance point of view rather than an aspirational point of view. And that's no disrespect to anyone. That's just simply to say that we have different histories in the development of both of our industries. And so it's kind of like, it's kind of like when you go back home to the cookout and you have that cousin that you don't really like, but you need to play with them that day. It's like that's how we are constantly when it comes to DEI and HR. It's that DEI folks feel limited when we have to work within the confines of human resources, and human resources feel pushed outside of legalities by the DEI folks. And so we're always in this tete-a-tete, if you will, between our two industries. So what I strongly suggest, and I think a lot of people have suggested this on any social media, is around, no, I'm a fan of not having DEI situated in human resource spaces. And at the same time, I need y'all to play nice. How about that?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's what I need. And that's not to say that, oh, well, you'll have a better CEO, or you'll have another person that you can report to that's better. That's irrelevant, actually. What's actually challenging is we don't know each other's history and how we got here. This kind of goes back to my dialogue points. We don't know each other's history until we study it. I've done a lot of study in HR and how we got here, and a lot of where we got a lot of our policies and traditions and so forth in HR have come from getting a lot of dings legally in response to, right? Where in DEI, we are not in response to. We are attempting to be proactive and ideal in this space. And that's probably the reason why we feel like we're stifling each other. And I don't want to feel that way. I want to work well with my HR colleagues, but also know that we need to think very strategically, which is why if there are any CEOs here or any presidents, whoever you are, if you are kind of the top of your org chart, think about how you plan to elevate DEI as a profession. That's one piece. The second piece is, which I feel like I'm repetitive here, but a second point, DEI is a profession. It is not an appendage. It's not, oh, this is a good add-on for someone else to do. I'm working with an organization right now that had someone in an HR role, and this person was elevated to a title that's similar to a CDO position. And there was only one bullet point of 20 that had anything to do with DEI. One bullet point out of several job functions. That tells me that there's a gross misunderstanding of what DEI is and how it's not the same as EEOC. It's not the same as human resources. It is a different and professional function, period. And so as we're all working in the body, I kind of feel like, sometimes we call the podiatrist to come in and be the cardiologist. No, we all have our skill sets. We need to work on the part of the body that we need to be in. And so that's where I'm constantly pushing this uphill battle of, no, you cannot just call the resident Black girl, Black man, Latina, LGBT person to come in and do this work, because that's not what they were hired for, number one. And number two, this is a profession. I don't walk into the hospital and say, I want to perform heart surgery on folks, even though I care about their heart deeply. So why would I just walk in and carte blanche say, oh, I can do this? This is a profession. This is a profession. And we get ourselves in trouble. And so then what happens, Dr. Nika, and I'm not going to put all of our business out there, but what I will say is that there have been many times that organizations called upon someone who had those lived identities that were underrepresented in the organization, and they called upon them to do the work that they weren't equipped to do. I feel bad for them. And then we get called to come unravel the fray.
Yeah, which is why there's so much talk right now of having to defend this work, because there's a lot of criticism that it's not effective. Well, if you have people that aren't equipped to do the work, that's leading the work, then it's not going to be effective. So I love everything that you just said. And what I do appreciate, and I want to go on record too, kind of sharing similar sentiments, is that this is not to amplify tension points between HR professionals and DEI practitioners. I mean, to your point, there is great value in being strategic alliances and working together, but it does live on its own, and it should. And so, for all the reasons you named, it's not just about compliance, and it's not just about, HR function. I mean, yes, human capital is the most important asset organizations have, but this work of DEI is very horizontal. It's not vertical, which means it extends to every department, purchasing, marketing, every department. And so I am with you. And I am glad that we have some practitioners who aren't afraid to keep naming that and amplifying that, because we did. I love when you said this is not an appendage. It is not extracurricular. It's not a committee, because while I do believe in the formation of strategic DEI councils and making sure those councils are well equipped to be a resource, A lot of times organizations will try to address their DEI needs strictly with a volunteer committee. And that can't be your be all end all for realizing DEI work, DEI input,
Mhm,
DEI output, DEI um, success stories. And so,
mhm,
yes,
mhm.
somebody put into the chat, equipped and compensated. Yes, let's not forget the compensated piece. This is not extracurricular work, it's work to drive your business. So let's make sure that whatever value you're adding to those individuals is commensurate with what they're sacrificing. Oh,
Absolutely.
soapbox. Okay,
Absolutely.
move on. We can move on because we have like 6 more minutes. I'm still not seeing any hands raised, but lots of activity happening in the chat. So I'm just going to keep rolling with my next question. I want to try to get in at least maybe one or two more with the time we have left. So we've talked a lot about how policies are really important to move this work forward, right?
Yes.
And what we do know is that oftentimes when we try to institute policies to help create greater centering around marginalized communities in the workplace, we are met with resistance. And so, Dr. Shaunna, with your counsel and your coaching approach, I would imagine that you have come against individuals that you have been working with that have really wanted to institute policy and they have been met with resistance. How do you coach them through that? What are some of the best practices
Mhm.
you share to help them overcome that?
Yeah, great question. So it's funny that you even bring that up because I remember going through my change management training, and one of the most important points. There's this acronym called ADKAR, where you think about awareness that there needs to be a change, the desire to make the change,
Right.
knowledge to do it, ability to do it. So you're moving boulders out the way, and then reinforcement, making sure that people can keep the changes in place, right? And what I
Okay,
always
give
found
those to us again,
interesting.
Dr. Shaunna. I don't want to go too fast on that. Give those to us again. You said
Oh,
ADKAR.
yes. Okay. So A is awareness. People need to
Huh?
be aware of the change that needs to happen. Desire. We want people to desire the change. We want them to want it. Knowledge. Do they know what they need to know to make the change? There's people that walk around and say, I know something needs to change, but how to do it, I don't know. Knowledge. Ability. Now they want to do it. They have the knowledge to do it, but it's too many roadblocks in the way. We need to get these boulders out of the way so we can let them go with the knowledge they have. And then once the change happens, how do we reinforce it to make sure we don't go back to what we used to be? Right. Okay. So that's this whole ADKAR change model, right? So to your question, the resistance piece usually happens around the D and the K, right?
Mhm.
And I remember when I was going through my my change management training. Now, mind you, I'm in a room where it's a lot of people from various industries. We have two individuals, one white male, one white female, that are facilitating this conversation, and they're thinking change as in changing from one accounting system to a new accounting
Yeah.
system.
Yeah.
Thinking, no, change racism to anti-racism. I'm thinking bigger, right? Okay, I'm in
Yes.
macro level
Yes.
here. So
Yes.
obviously we're already not starting on the same page, but I asked that very question, Nika, around what do you do when folks never have the desire? They
Yeah.
never have it. I don't care how much information they have, there will be denial at the A. There will be denial that it even needs to happen, right? And so here's what I suggest with that, with folks that are resistors. The first thing that I would say is if you're going to work in this space, assume resistors.
Oh,
There's
yeah.
some individuals that I work with, they walk into a room and they think, well, if I am convincing enough and if I provide enough data, they'll come over here. No, I
Yeah.
have people that actually bait you for the information so that they can divert you from doing the work. So we're not
Oh,
going to do that.
absolutely.
So, so there are going to be people that never desire. So a few things I would say. First of all, I don't want this to sound like it's childlike per se, but you need to contain them, right? So if there are people, because remember, I've worked in higher ed environments. So let's talk about those folks that have tenure that aren't going anywhere and they're going to die at their desk and you're trying to get a policy through, right? So contain them. How can we make sure that they don't affect what you're trying to change or affect it less, right? So maybe they don't need to sit on that committee and they need to sit on another committee, okay? But
Mhm.
contain them. Secondly, I am very okay with confrontation, good confrontation. Usually
Mhm.
that means from a dialogue perspective of, I want to get down to those 5 whys, the whys of the dissent, the
Yeah.
whys of I don't want this to happen. And then the last piece that I would say, and that's for when you can, and this sounds very harsh, there are some folks that literally need to be removed. They need to be,
Absolutely.
and I'm not saying removed from the whole organization. Sometimes they do need to be removed from the whole organization. Sometimes they need to be moved into different spaces. So when I have
Yeah.
that tenured faculty member that needs to be moved into another department so I can get this work done, so be it, right? And so just thinking about as you walk in, and that again is part of the change management plan. When you draft out a plan, is be ready before the resistors pop up. You need your
Yeah.
action plan before they emerge, because sometimes you're not going to see them as quickly as you think, and you need to be
Yeah.
on the ready, Johnny on the spot to respond. So that's
I
what I
love
would
that.
suggest there.
That is so good. One of the questions I often ask clients when we're working with them, especially in the readiness phase to ensure that they are ready, is, we ask questions like, what would derail this work, or what would be a barrier? Because I want you to know
Oof,
those hurdles. You have to identify them
oof,
in the beginning. And that's similar to what you're talking about. Identify even the resistors.
that's
And
right.
we
That's right.
also give ourselves permission to value the fact that sometimes, while maybe someone's heart and mind won't change, if we can at least get their behavior to align with the policies, then it's a win in
That's
and of
it.
itself too, right? So this
That's
is
it.
so good. And I told you we were going to get to the end and we were going to find that we needed more time. And that's where we are right now. But unfortunately, we don't have more time, at least not today. But I certainly want to make sure that I can bring you back. I love the boldness
Of course.
that you have brought to this conversation around leadership having that backbone. You've mentioned and alluded to that several times today. And so that's definitely resonating with me. Thank you, Dr. Shaunna. I want to give you the last 60 seconds to close this out in whatever way that feels comfortable for you. And so take it away.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I just want to say really briefly, thank you for being here, number one. Number two, I realize there's been a lot of things that have happened, especially with SCOTUS in the last week, that can be disconcerting. But I encourage you to hold on and stay in the fight. It's kind of like that meme where you tie a knot and hold on, right? And that's
Hold
exactly what we're
on.
going to do. And the last piece I would say is take care of yourself. Take care of yourself. Go to your doctor, go to your mental health professional, take that walk when it gets heavy, because we need you in the fight. And if you're not healthy enough to be in the fight, then we're short on folks, right? So we need you there. So I encourage you to stay in there, hang in there. Nika and I are trying to retire, but we want to retire on a good note, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's been such a pleasure. Thank you all for joining us today. We
Thank
hope to
you.
see you again next Friday. And if this was content that you found valuable, be sure to share out the replay or invite others to check out the podcast. Thank you all so much. Take care.